Imagine stepping off the plane after months away. The desert dust still clinging to your boots, the roar of engines and the smell of jet fuel clinging to your senses, and the only thought in your head being the comfort of home. Home, your sanctuary, the place you fought for in more ways than one. The front porch where you used to drink coffee at dawn, the living room couch with the worn spot in the corner where you always sat, the flag fluttering proudly out front that meant more to you than any title or medal. For me, that home wasn't just a piece of property. It was my anchor in a world that had spent months trying to break me. Every firefight I crawled through, every sleepless night under mortar fire, I held onto the image of that house like it was a lifeline. It was where I would finally breathe easy, drop the weight of my gear, and remember that I was more than just a soldier. So imagine the shock when I pulled up in a beat-up rental car, duffel bag slung across my shoulder, and saw a family I didn't recognize lounging on my porch. A woman in yoga pants sipping iced tea, a man scrolling on his phone with his feet up on the railing, and two kids running across the yard with a golden retriever that I sure as hell didn't own. For a second, I thought maybe the exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Deployment messes with your head. You see things. You expect things. Maybe this was just another hallucination born out of too many months of stress and adrenaline. But then the man looked up, noticed me standing on the sidewalk, and gave me a little wave. Not the wave of a neighbor who recognizes you. Not even the wave of someone being polite to a stranger. No, this was the wave of someone saying, "Yeah, buddy, this is my place. Move along." Something cold ran down my spine. My porch, my flagpole, my windows with the curtains I had chosen. All of it suddenly felt foreign, like I was the intruder. I tightened my grip on the duffel bag and walked up the path, my boots crunching against the gravel. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, lowering her glass. Her tone sharp with the confidence of someone who believed they belonged here. "This is my house," I said flatly. They both laughed, like I had cracked some kind of joke. The man stood up, brushing imaginary dust from his shorts. No, this is our house. Been here 3 months. Signed a lease through the HOA. You must be new to the neighborhood." I stared at him, searching his face for some crack in the mask, some hint that this was a misunderstanding. But no, he was serious. The kids darted past me, giggling, the dog barking happily as if to confirm their claim to my land. My chest tightened. "I didn't lease this place out," I said, my voice dropping lower, the same tone I used in combat when I needed my orders heard. "I own this house. Paid every damn cent. I left it locked when I deployed. And now you're standing on my porch." The man's smirk faltered just slightly, but he covered it up fast. "Look, buddy, I don't know what game you're playing, but we're legal tenants. We've got paperwork. If you've got a problem, take it up with the HOA. The HOA. Just the mention of those 3 letters made my blood boil. Before deployment, they'd been a nuisance more than anything. Petty fines for leaving my trash bin out too long. Letters about my grass growing half an inch too tall. Constant complaints about my flagpole being too tall for regulation. They were power-drunk bullies with nothing better to do than micromanage the people who actually paid to live there. But this was no fine or warning letter. This was theft. They had taken my absence, my service, and turned it into an opportunity to profit. I tried the door, locked. My own key didn't fit. The locks had been changed. Rage bubbled in my chest like a grenade with the pin half pulled. Every instinct screamed to kick the door down, drag these strangers out by their collars and reclaim what was mine. But years of discipline in uniform held me back. "Not yet, not like this. Fine," I muttered. "I'll talk to the HOA. The woman scoffed, her glass clinking on the porch railing. "Good luck. They're the ones who gave us this place. Maybe you should have kept better track of your property before you disappeared, huh?" Words cut deeper than any bullet I'd ever taken. Disappeared. That's what they called it, disappearing, when I had been thousands of miles away, keeping their right to sip iced tea in peace intact. I clenched my jaw, turned on my heel, and walked away before I did something that would land me in handcuffs instead of back in my bed. The HOA office was a squat little building at the edge of the neighborhood, painted in cheerful beige tones that hid the rot inside. I stormed in, boots heavy on the tile, duffel bag slung over my shoulder like a weapon. The receptionist looked up with a too bright smile, but it faltered when she saw my face. "Can I help you, sir?" Yes, I growled. You can explain to me why strangers are living in my house. Her eyes darted nervously, her fingers fumbling on the keyboard. What's your address? I rattled it off, every number and street name etched into my memory like the call signs of my brothers in arms. She typed, clicked, and then froze. Oh, right, that property was listed as vacant. The HOA board authorized a lease agreement 3 months ago. Vacant? I spat the word like poison. I wasn't vacant, I was deployed, serving this country. And while I was gone, you rented out my damn home? She swallowed hard, clearly not trained to handle this kind of confrontation. I just follow the records. Maybe you should speak directly with the board president. He's in a meeting right now, but I didn't wait for her to finish. I pushed past the counter, straight toward the boardroom at the back. The door was shut, muffled voices inside, laughter spilling out like the sound of hyenas tearing at a carcass. I shoved it open so hard it banged against the wall, and every head in the room snapped toward me. The president, a balding man with too much cologne and a permanent sneer, sat at the head of the table. "Can we help you?" he asked, his voice dripping with irritation. "You sure as hell can," I said, stepping forward until I stood at the edge of the table. "You rented out my home while I was deployed, my home. Without my permission." He leaned back, folding his hands over his gut like a king addressing a peasant. "Ah, yes. That property. Well, according to our records, it was abandoned. The HOA has the right to manage abandoned properties to maintain neighborhood value. We simply acted in the best interest of the community." "Abandoned?" I barked. I left for deployment. I locked my doors. I paid every HOA fee on time, even from overseas. "And you have the audacity to call it abandoned?" His smirk widened, smug and venomous. "Look, soldier, if you wanted to protect your property, you shouldn't have left it unattended. We followed procedure. The tenants signed a legal lease. If you got a problem, you can take it up in court. Until then, they stay." The room erupted in murmurs, some of the board members exchanging uneasy glances, but none of them speaking up. My fists clenched so tight my knuckles popped. I had faced warlords with more honor than this man. He was stealing from me in broad daylight, twisting the rules to line his pockets, and he thought he was untouchable because he hid behind bureaucracy. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to a deadly calm. "You made a mistake, a big one, and you're going to regret it." His smile faltered for just a moment, but he covered it up with a dismissive wave. "Meeting adjourned," he said, ignoring me, turning his chair away like I was nothing. That was the moment I knew this wasn't going to be solved with words or paperwork. Not with people like him. He thought I was powerless. He thought deployment had broken me. What he didn't realize was that I wasn't alone anymore. My brothers, my platoon, they were just one call away. And if there's one thing we knew how to do better than anyone, it was taking back what was ours. I drove away from that boardroom with my pulse pounding like it hadn't since my last mission. Every nerve in my body screamed for a fight, but years of discipline told me to wait, to plan, to choose my moment. I had been robbed, humiliated, spat on by people who thought paperwork and arrogance could shield them from consequence. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd crawl back into line and file a complaint, wait months while lawyers bled me dry. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The thing about deployment is you don't survive it alone. You come back with scars, but you also come back with brothers, men who've carried you bleeding through the dark, men whose hands have been steady on your shoulder in the middle of chaos. We were more than soldiers. We were family, and family doesn't watch one of their own get screwed without stepping in. That night, sitting in the dingy motel room I'd checked into, because I couldn't even sleep in my own damn bed, I pulled out my phone. My contacts list was full of names that meant survival. I scrolled through, fingers hesitating only for a second before I tapped the one I needed. The phone rang twice, then a gravelly voice answered. "Brother, you made it home." "Not exactly," I said, my throat tight with restrained fury. "They took my house. HOA rented it out. Changed the locks. Got tenants living in there like it's theirs." There was a pause. Then a low chuckle that carried no humor, only promise. "Say the word." I didn't have to explain. Didn't have to beg. These men had followed me into firefights that lasted for days, had trusted me when every other sound was screaming chaos. They knew what I meant without spelling it out. By dawn, the convoy started to roll in. Not in Humvees or armored trucks this time. Pickup trucks, motorcycles, old civilian rides that looked harmless until you saw who was stepping out. Right on cue, 2 squad cars rolled up, lights flashing. The president's confidence flickered again, but he tried to recover, waving them down. "Officers! Arrest these men, they're trespassing." They're intimidating tenants. They've got no legal claim. The officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, eyes scanning the scene. But then they recognized me. Recognition dawned in their faces, not because I was a local celebrity,
but because I was the veteran they'd seen in the papers.
The one whose deployment had been covered when our unit pulled off the impossible overseas. One of them even nodded slightly, a gesture of quiet respect. I handed over my proof, deeds, tax records, HOA payment receipts. This is my house. They forged abandonment. They leased it without my consent. That's fraud. The officers scanned the documents, glanced at the crowd of soldiers standing silently behind me, then at the HOA president sweating bullets in the sun. One officer looked at the tenants. "Sir, ma'am, you need to vacate the property, now!" The man sputtered, looking from the cops to the president to me, but the fight drained from him. His wife grabbed his arm, hissing under her breath. "We're not going to war with them over this." They packed fast, tossing clothes and belongings into bags, the kids crying, the dog barking anxiously. My men didn't touch them, didn't say a word, just stood as a wall of presence until the car drove off, leaving my driveway empty again. The president was next. He tried to stammer excuses, tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, but the officers weren't having it. One of them read him his rights on the spot, slapping cuffs on his wrists while the neighborhood watched from behind curtains and half-open garage doors. The mighty HOA president dragged away like the crook he was. And when it was over, when the yard was quiet and the sun dipped low, I stepped up onto my porch again. My porch. My lock, my home. I pulled out a fresh set of keys, changed the locks with my own hands, and hung the flag back where it belonged. Snapping in the evening wind, behind me, my platoon spread out across the yard, lighting cigars, clapping me on the back, their laughter filling the air. No shots fired, no blood spilled, just clean, precise, absolute victory. For the first time since stepping off that plane, I breathed easy. The battle had come to my doorstep, but I hadn't fought it alone. My platoon had my back just like always, and together we had taken it back, by sundown. The neighborhood was quiet, but the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It was the silence of people hiding behind their curtains, whispering into phones, spreading rumors about what they'd just seen. My platoon had rolled into the suburbs like a storm front, and just as quickly, we had left calm in our wake. But it wasn't the kind of calm the HOA had expected. It wasn't control. It was justice, and it hung in the air heavier than any summer heat. I stood on my porch, the flag I'd raised catching the wind, its fabric snapping proudly. The sound was sharper, cleaner than it had ever been before. Maybe it was just me hearing it that way after everything. I'd been in firefights where that flag meant survival, hope, something to hold on to. Now it was here, planted in the ground I had nearly lost, defiantly visible to every neighbor who had stood by and watched. My platoon didn't scatter immediately. That wasn't their way. They spread out across the yard and driveway like they had in desert compounds or jungle clearings, a natural instinct to secure the perimeter, to let me breathe while keeping the world at bay. A couple of them set up folding chairs from the back of their trucks. Others broke out coolers. By the time the sun dropped below the rooftops, there was smoke from a grill, laughter cutting through the uneasy silence of the cul-de-sac. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was home. Inside, the house was stripped bare. The tenants hadn't left much, some trash, a few broken things, the faint smell of unfamiliar cooking still clinging to the walls. But it didn't matter. My boots echoed against the hardwood as I walked through each room, hand brushing against the walls like I was relearning their shape. The bedroom, empty but still mine. The living room, hollow without my furniture but still familiar. Even the scuffed kitchen counter felt like a reunion. When I came back outside, the guys had transformed the yard into something between a cookout and an after-mission debrief. Steaks hissed on the grill, bottles clinked, and the sound of easy conversation drifted through the air. I dropped my duffel by the porch and joined them, the smell of searing meat almost overwhelming after months of MREs and chow hall slop. One of the guys handed me a plate, loaded heavier than I'd seen in a year. "You good, brother?" he asked. I nodded, chewing slowly, staring out at the street. Better now, but it wasn't just about eating. Every bite tasted like reclamation. Every laugh around me reminded me that I hadn't been alone, not overseas, not here, not ever. The HOA president had been cuffed and hauled off, but his shadow still lingered. I could feel the neighborhood buzzing, wondering what would happen next. Would the HOA crumble? Would someone else step up to try to keep the leash tight around our throats? The thought used to fill me with dread. But now, as I looked around at my platoon lounging in my driveway like kings returning to their castle, dread was the furthest thing from my mind. Later, when the grill was cooling and the bottles were fewer, the talk grew quieter, heavier. We swapped stories, some funny, some dark. It always happened that way. Laughter gave way to memory, and memory pulled up ghosts. We'd lost brothers overseas. We always would carry that weight. And tonight, with my home reclaimed, it felt like we were also reclaiming a piece of them too. Because everything we did, every fight, every stand, we did for the ones who couldn't come back. The neighbors started trickling out, first one or two, then more. Curiosity always won over fear. They walked cautiously down their driveways, offering tentative smiles, baked goods, awkward small talk. Some apologized quietly, admitting they'd known something was wrong but hadn't dared to step in. Others offered congratulations, relief that the HOA had finally been cut down a peg. It didn't surprise me. Tyrants thrive on silence, and the HOA had ruled this place like a petty kingdom for too long. But now they had seen what happens when someone pushes back. I didn't make speeches. That wasn't my way, but I let my presence be enough. And maybe that was more powerful than words. The sight of me sitting on my porch again, flanked by my brothers, was its own kind of declaration. The legal side came next. My lawyer, sharp, relentless, filed charges faster than the ink could dry. Fraud, theft of property, unauthorized leasing. Every count stacked up against the HOA like sandbags breaking under floodwater. The president's smirk, the one that had mocked me in the boardroom, was replaced with mugshots on the evening news. His cronies scattered, resignations piling up until the HOA was a skeleton crew, stripped of its fangs. The tenants tried to fight back in court, but they had nothing, no claim, no standing. The lease was void, a scam from the beginning. They disappeared as fast as they'd appeared, leaving no trace except the bitter memory of iced tea on my porch. It didn't end overnight. Nothing ever does. There were still hearings, paperwork, endless motions. But the tide had turned and it was rolling in my favor. For once, justice wasn't something abstract, something we talked about overseas but never felt at home. This time it was real, and through it all, my platoon stayed close. They didn't move in. They had their own lives, their own homes. But they were always a call away. If I needed repairs, someone showed up with tools. If I needed company, the grill fired up again. If I needed silence, they gave me space but never distance. It was the same unspoken bond that had kept us alive in the desert, now grounding me in the suburbs. As weeks passed, the house came back to life. Furniture returned, photos hung, the smell of my own cooking filled the kitchen. Every little step was an act of defiance, a reminder that this space was mine, bought with sweat, blood, and sacrifice. The dogwood tree in the yard bloomed again, white petals scattering across the lawn like confetti, and I realized I had never appreciated it before. Maybe I had taken too much for granted before deployment. Not anymore. One night, long after the legal dust had settled, I sat on the porch alone. The neighborhood was quiet, truly quiet this time. My flag rustled overhead. The house behind me was warm, lights glowing soft through the windows. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt whole. I thought about what had happened, about how close I had come to losing everything. Not to a firefight, not to an explosion, but to a board of petty tyrants with pens and paper. And yet, in its own way, it had been a battle just as fierce. They'd underestimated me. They'd underestimated what it means to take something from a soldier who has already given so much. The war zone this time had been suburbia, not some far-off desert. The weapons weren't rifles, but unity, presence, unshakable resolve. And in the end, that had been enough. More than enough. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the breeze carry the sound of the flag above me. Tomorrow would bring new fights. Life always did. But tonight, this chapter was over. The house was mine. The ground beneath my boots was mine. And the people who thought they could steal it had learned a lesson they'd never forget. I wasn't just home. I had taken it back.